The consensus narrative is a kinetic distraction. You are being conditioned to watch the skies for hypersonic missiles, a threat profile that is loud, visible, and strategically obsolete for the current crisis vector. The terminal insolvency of a resource-rich state like Venezuela creates a new launch condition. The real threat is not a missile launch. It is the strategic initiation of silence. A nation reduced to a non-performing geopolitical liability has one remaining point of leverage: asymmetric escalation. The primary vector is not military, but economic. CSIS analysts have modeled the catastrophic impact of severing key transatlantic subsea data cables. We are not talking about a market correction. We are talking about a global liquidity seizure. The immediate freezing of trillions in digital assets. The second vector is orbital, not anti-satellite missiles, but ground-based directed energy weapons designed for a single purpose: to blind the optical and communication sensors of our satellite constellations. A dazzling event. This is the blueprint for creating the blind Leviathan, an entity with unmatched kinetic power, but stripped of its vision. Unable to verify targets, unable to secure financial communications, unable to project power with precision. The goal is systemic paralysis. This is why the U.S. Navy deployed an MQ-4C Triton, callsign BLK-CAT-6, for a 10-hour surveillance mission over the Caribbean on January 8th. Public flight data confirms it. This platform is not hunting for submarines in a traditional sense. It is conducting high-altitude intelligence mapping of the silent vectors, locating potential ground-based laser sites, and monitoring the integrity of undersea cable landing stations. The mission is not to prevent a war, but to preempt a financial contagion event. A state is not a nation. It is a balance sheet with an army. Its primary directive is solvency. When liabilities, debt, domestic unrest, a collapsing resource base overwhelm assets, the state enters a terminal solvency crisis. This is not a political failure, it is a mathematical one. The blueprint for this endgame is not theoretical. According to CSIS analysis, the kinetic operation in Ukraine is a direct function of a domestic solvency crisis inside Russia. An unpopular resource-draining war became a primary liability on the Kremlin's books, forcing a pivot. When conventional options are exhausted, the state must generate leverage through other means. This is the pivot to asymmetry. Weakness becomes a weapon. A non-performing geopolitical asset, a state like Venezuela that was once among the world's richest from oil wealth, possesses a final, potent form of leverage, the credible threat of its own chaotic collapse. The motive for intervention becomes clear. It is not conquest, it is not a blow against China, as the bulwark confirms. The persistent MQ-4C Triton surveillance missions over the Caribbean are not mapping invasion routes, they are pricing risk. The primary threat vector is not military, but contagion, either a mass migratory event overwhelming regional capacity or a financial default triggering a cascade failure. This is the launch-on-warning protocol for a solvency crisis. A state that weaponizes its own insolvency forces a preemptive, kinetic foreclosure. The objective is not to occupy, but to neutralize the contagion vector before it can activate. The financial system is already modeling this eventuality. The Bank Policy Institute's forward-looking research exchange for December 2025 is the system bracing for impact. The intervention is a clinical, mathematical necessity to prevent a systemic meltdown. The entire model for calculating geopolitical risk is now obsolete. The calculus of force projection has fundamentally inverted. A Royal United Services Institute (RUSI) analysis presents the raw mathematics. A $5 million main battle tank, a symbol of 20th century industrial power, can now be neutralized by a $500 first-person view drone. This is a 10,000 to 1 cost asymmetry. It is not an evolution. It is a catastrophic failure of the legacy defense model. This economic inversion is the engine of what strategists call the democratization of violence. The capability to deliver precision kinetic effects, once the exclusive domain of superpower militaries, has been placed into the hands of anyone with a credit card and an internet connection. It removes the state's monopoly on high-leverage force. A non-performing state, or even subnational actors within it, can now acquire a launch-on-warning capability against critical economic infrastructure for a rounding error in their budget. Therefore, the protocol for a kinetic foreclosure can't be a traditional invasion. Deploying tank divisions is a financial non-starter against a threat that costs pennies on the dollar. The new protocol is about surgically removing the operator, not the tank. It is counter-network warfare. The objective is not to seize territory, but to liquidate the human and technical nodes that give an insolvent state its asymmetric leverage, preventing the contagion event before it can be triggered. The primary theater of operations is not the South China Sea. It is the Caribbean Basin. On January 8th, a U.S. Navy MQ-4C Triton, callsign BLK-CAT-6, executed a 10-hour intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance mission over this zone. This was not a routine patrol. It was a pre-operational assessment. According to CSIS, high-endurance ISR platforms like the Triton are deployed to establish a baseline before a significant shift in strategic posture. The target is not a rival military. It is a financial black hole. The core liability is the terminal insolvency of Venezuela. Once among the world's richest nations due to its vast oil wealth, it is now a non-performing sovereign asset. Analysis from RUSI confirms that the prior Maduro operation was misdiagnosed by legacy media. It was never about countering China. It was an early, failed attempt at portfolio management. A failed state with significant resource collateral presents a unique vector for systemic risk, asymmetric contagion. To mitigate risk, new protocols are staged in gray zones, regions exhibiting similar, albeit lower-grade symptoms of state decay. Recent travel warnings and documented instability in places like South Africa or even Canada are not the central crisis. They are proxy laboratories. In these zones, financial and logistical responses to civic breakdown are tested and refined. It is a live fire exercise for the playbook intended for the primary theater. The endgame is not conquest, it is a kinetic foreclosure. The state's remaining leverage, the ability to weaponize migration or trigger a regional debt default, becomes a launch-on-warning trigger for intervention. The Triton's surveillance is the equivalent of an appraiser valuing a property before seizure. The timeline is already being modeled. Reports from the Bank Policy Institute point to systemic debt contagion scenarios being wargamed for December 2025. The mathematical certainty is that an insolvent asset will be liquidated, not bailed out. The doctrine is known as launch-on-warning. The core logic is brutal. When incoming hostile assets are detected, there is insufficient time to confirm the attack's validity before retaliation is the only option left. The protocol is therefore baked into the system. Launch on the warning of an attack, or risk being destroyed on the ground. It is a mathematical response to a timing problem. The primary accelerant for this protocol is no longer a missile, but a targeted cyber attack. Analysts at CSIS refer to this scenario as the fog of digital war. The objective is not kinetic destruction, but strategic blindness. By corrupting or severing the data feed from early warning radar and surveillance assets, an adversary forces the commander's hand. The commander is now operating in a total information vacuum. The silence could be a system malfunction, or it could be the final moment before impact. The protocol dictates that in the absence of information, the worst-case scenario must be assumed. The fear of being disarmed forces the launch. This isn't a decision made by a human. It's the execution of a predetermined, automated response to data deprivation. This electronic battlespace is active. Public flight data confirms that on January 8th, a U.S. Navy MQ-4C Triton drone operated for 10 hours on a surveillance mission over the Caribbean. Assets like BLK Cat-6 are the eyes of the system. Blinding these platforms is the modern equivalent of disabling a radar installation, creating the exact conditions of uncertainty required to trigger a kinetic escalation from a state of fear. The mathematical certainty of a solvency crisis forces a state's hand. When conventional leverage is zero, the only remaining asset is asymmetric threat potential. A state like Venezuela, once among the world's richest nations, understands this calculus. U.S. naval surveillance assets, like the MQ-4C Triton operating over the Caribbean, are not postured for conventional invasion. They are monitoring for the launch vectors of systemic disruption. The trigger is not malice, it is the approaching deadline. Financial authorities, per documents from entities like the Bank Policy Institute, have models projecting tolerance thresholds. Their research exchange, December 2025, is not an academic exercise. It is a terminal date for carrying a non-performing geopolitical liability. The insolvent state knows the kinetic foreclosure is being priced in. Therefore, the calibration shot is a logical precursor. It is a non-kinetic demonstration of kinetic effect. Within the next 12 months, anticipate a significant, attribution-impossible disruption targeting a Tier 1 U.S. logistics and data hub. A coordinated cyber-physical event causing a 48-hour shutdown of a major Gulf Coast port, timed to coincide with a regional financial clearinghouse data failure. It is designed to test U.S. response protocols and recalibrate the kinetic cost of intervention.